Welcome back. Hope everyone is doing well. I want to share a very, very strange, a very, very almost baffling story that the Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah and Daf Yud Zayin Amid Aleph tells us about a man named Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya. First of all, we're going to see that he is he's only called Rebbe posthumously. He's only called Rebbe at the very, very end of this incident, from really the first or second line of the Gemara. If he was called Rebbe beforehand, it would have been perhaps the greatest rabbinic scandal in the history of the world. But this Gemara has a lot to do with Teshuva. We are standing a couple of days away from Rosh Hashanah, from the Yom Hadin, from the Aseret Simei Teshuva. We already began saying Slichos. Ashkenazim began saying Slichos this past Motzei Shabbos. And just like we began last week, speaking about a specific Gemara dealing with Teshuva, this week we will do the same. So the Gemara tells us, Amru alav al Rabbi Elazar ben Dudaya. They said, this is what they spoke about, this is what they said about this man, Rabbi Elazar ben Dudaya, but we know that he's really called Elazar ben Dudaya until later on he gets the title Rabbi. What was so great about this man? Why was he called Rebbe? What's the story? So this is the rabbinic scandal part. This is why, thankfully, he's not a rabbi before this story. Shelo hiniach zona achat ba'olam shelo ba'aleha. There was not a prostitute. There was not a harlot. There was not a zona in the entire world that he had not been with, that he had not visited. He heard finally, whatever, in the circles, I guess, that he traveled in, he heard that there was this zona that was Bekrache Hayam, that was overseas. It was many miles away. And she was very high end. She charged a lot. She charged many dinarin. That was her fee b'schar. That was her payment. And so there was, let's say, this very high end, maybe I don't know, well known, but this high end zona that he had heard about. Not al kis dinarin v'halach. So what did Elazar ben Durdaya do? He takes his wallet, he takes his piece, he probably cashes out, and he goes and he travels to the other end of the world. Not al kis dinarin v'halach v'avar aleh shivas dinaros. And to get there, right? Sometimes you describe, this place is so weird. I'm going to Perth, Australia. It take me 3 different flights, right? She had to cross over 7 rivers to get there. Va'avar ala shiva naharo. She had to cross over 7 rivers, or he had to cross over 7 rivers to get there. B'shas hergel davar heficha arma. So they're there. They're about to sin. He pays her the schar, and b'shat hergel, at that moment, at the moment of onset, the moment that they were about to be together, Heificha va'amra. All of a sudden, like she had air coming out. Air was expressed from her mouth, almost like perhaps she burped. Right? She burped by accident. And what does she say? This zona, she writes. She says, "Kishem shahaficha zo eno chazeres limkoma." Just like this breath. Just like this breath that emanated, I expressed from my mouth, and that breath will never come back into my body. Kach, so too, Elazar ben Durdaya, ein mekablin oso b'tshuva. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is never ever going to accept Rebbe Elazar ben Durdaya, his tshuva. The zona that's given like the greatest musar shmuz of all time, right? All of a sudden, she burps. She burps, air comes out. And she has this like epiphany. Just like this belch, this air is not going to come out, is not going to come back into my body. So too, Elazar ben Durdaya will never be accepted back into tshuva. So all of a sudden, Elazar ben Durdaya hears this. Halach v'yashav ben shnei harim ugvos. He goes and he sits between shnei harim ugvos. He sits between 2 like mountain ranges and hills. Amar, and he says to the mountains, Harim ugvos bikshu alai rachamim. Please, mountains and hills, please daven on my behalf. Please pray for rachamim, for mercy. Ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for mercy on my behalf. Amru lo. They say to him, Ad sha'anu mivakshim alecha. Before we ask for rachamim for you, nivakesh alatzmeinu. Rather, you know what? We need to ask Rachmanos. We need to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for Rachmanos on our behalf. Amar, Amar Shamayim va'aretz bakshu alai rachim. So Elazar ben Dudai asked, he said, Shamayim va'aretz. He turned to the heavens and he turned to the aretz and he said, please, Shamayim and aretz, please, on my behalf, please ask, please beseech, please cry out and call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he should grant rachamim, he should grant mercy to me. So what do they say? They respond to Amru. Shamayim and Aretz responds to Elazar ben Derdaya ad sha'anu mivakshim alecha before we beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu for you, nevakesh al atzmeinu, right? First, we should ask for rachim for us. So then he says, chama ulevana, the cham, the sun, ulevana, and the moon. He looks to the sun and the moon and he says, bikshu alai rachamim. Please, sun, moon, all the stars, all the constellations. Please daven for me. Ask mercy from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ad sha'anu mivakshim alecha. They answer, right, before we are gonna ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for mercy for you, Elazar ben Dudaya, nevakish al atzmeinu. We need to daven for us, right? Amar, Kochavim Mazalos. Sorry, then he turns to the stars and to the Mazalos, to all the constellations, and he says, same thing. Bikshor le'rachamim. They say to him, Amrulo. They say to him, Ad sha'anu v'akshim alecha. Before we daven for you, nivakish al atzmeinu. First, what's very weird about this Gemara is that there's a Gemara in Bava Kama that tells us that if you want your tefillos to be answered, right, one of the keys, one of the secret sauces to have your tefillah answered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to first daven for somebody else. Daven for somebody else that they should have, let's say, a refuah shlema. So hopefully you'll be able to have a refuah shlema. But maybe that doesn't apply here because it's the hills and the mountains and the sun and the stars that are asking for rachamim. Right? So once he realizes, he turned to the mountains. The mountains didn't daven for him. He turned to the sun and the moon. They didn't. Shemayim and Aretz, they didn't daven for him. And then the sun and the constellation, they didn't. So he says such a powerful line. Amar, having failed to find anybody to help him. No one's going to daven for him. No one's going to help him. What does he say? Amar, he says really to himself, or maybe he screamed it out. Ein hadavar talui ela bi. That the matter, this thing, me returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, me repairing and rectifying and reconnecting with God, Ein hadavar talui, it's not dependent on anything, ela bi. The matter, it's all on me. I need to be responsible. I need to take accountability. I need to be the one who makes a difference in my life, who turns the corner, who pivots, who changes. And ein hadavar talui ela bi. If I want to reinvigorate and renew my relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ein hadavar talui ela bi. The matter depends completely, solely on me. The ball is completely in my court. Heiniach rosho bein birkav. What does he do then? He puts his head between his knees, between his legs. Viga'a bivchia. And all of a sudden he bursts out crying. He goes into this ball. He crunches in this ball. He starts crying. Ad sheyatza nishmaso, until he dies. Yatza Basko, he dies, right? He basically felt so bad. He wanted to turn the corner. He wanted to get better. He cries out, probably the most genuine and sincere and authentic tefillah a person could ever have. And all of a sudden, Yitzasa Nishmaso, he dies. And then Yatza Basko v'amra, a heavenly voice comes and says, Rabbi Elazar, now he's Rabbi. Only now he's Rabbi. Rabbi Elazar ben Derdaya mizuma l'chai olam haba. Rabbi Elazar ben Derdaya has now been readied. He's now ready. He's mizuman l'chaye ha'olam haba. And that's how the Gemara ends. What a bizarre story. What an unbelievably baffling, weird, bizarre story. The whole story is unbelievably bizarre. You know, her just obviously, if you take the woman, right, the woman's, you know, her speaking up, her all of a sudden seeing this random thing that happens, you know, this bodily function that happens to her, and her like taking that to heart, and then her, you know, preaching to Elazar, right? Is that something that she would always do with her customers, or is that something she would always do with her whatever customers, clients, whatever? Is that was that her thing? Was that her her way that she would address their spirit? You know, not that she's obviously not the biggest tzaddikus in the world, right? But these people they're pretty big degenerates, right? And she's going to now address their spiritual makeup and their spiritual their spiritual levels. And what is also unbelievably bizarre is that he seems to take her teaching to heart. He seems to be affected by it, right? His conversation. Then he has a conversation with the hills and the stars and the moon. What is that all about? And why does he die? So let's try to understand some of these ideas. It's just a baffling story. First of all, Rebbe Elazar ben Dudai, this is the only time he's quoted in all of Shas. In all of rabbinic literature, he's never quoted anywhere. His name is not mentioned anywhere. No teaching of his is ever recorded. He doesn't have any students. He doesn't have any teachers. But what is going on in this story? So let's look at a couple of ideas. I think the first idea is ultimately that we all can utilize our free will to really emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to seek out God, to follow or to follow our more base desires, right? We can spend a life trying to be saintly and trying to be angelic, or we can just kind of like give in and just say, you know what, I have an urge, I have a feeling, I have a passion, I have a desire, and I'm going to run with that. And that's the greatness of life. That's also that's the test of life. We're given free will, and we have really, right, like Robert Frost, two roads diverged in the wood, and whichever one. Hopefully we take the one less traveled by, and the less traveled one by is one with a commitment to holiness and to sanctity. But when this happens, right, so now I have this free will, and I think this is really at the core of what Elazar ben Dudai is going through. When this happens and I sin and I do something that I'm not proud of, either it's something financial or something, it could be more sexual, it could be, it could be with anything that I am personally struggling with. Do I say ad kan, that there's no, I'm stopping right now, or do I let gravity take over and I sink lower and I just lower and lower and I go down that rabbit hole? Right, and I sink, and gravity pulls me, almost like Rebbe Elazar ben Dudai probably had it. No zona, there was not a zona in the world that he hadn't visited. Or do you say, no, I'm going to break through, I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to reconnect to purity, to sanctity, and to holiness. And that's everybody's challenge. And that was clearly his challenge. You could see the Rav Chaim Friedlander quotes, I think, the Maharal, and he writes, Rav Chaim Friedlander in his Sefer Sifsei Chaim, he writes that Durdaya is from a Gemara in Tanis. The Gemara says there that Durdaya are like the dregs of wine. It's the bottom of wine, the garbage of the wine. And on one hand, he was a durdaya. He was like the bottom of the barrel, the dreg of society, or the dreg of the wine. But on the other hand, right, he was a person who had Elazar. That was his name. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu could help you, right? So did he define himself as a durdaya, or did like in the end of his life, did he define himself? Did he define himself? Where he had a relation with God, and he was going to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help him. Amazingly, and I think this is part of it, she loses real control of her body, right? She just, she burps, she belches, and that message, what's the message there? It's that ultimately she and he at this moment in her life and this and that, their bodies ruled over them. And that's the issue. Do we allow us and our brains to rule over our bodies? Or when it says it just came out of her, right? And she was almost like an eved. She was like a slave to her body, right? Do our bodies rule over us? And in this case, their bodies were clearly, guys, a man visits every zona in the world. She's this high class, amazing zona, well thought of, I guess, in that world, right? And those are people whose bodies rule over them. And it just like, and that's the idea, that it could just be sometimes a person is like, I think I can quit, right? What was the craziness of Elazar ben Dudai? He was probably like everybody. Who were basically like almost addicts. And he felt like, no, I'm not an addict. I can really stop if I want to stop, right? Oh, you know what? I can quit when I want to quit. oh, I'll do it at Rosh Hashanah, I'll do it next week, I'll do it next month, I'll do it after I have a kid, I'll start learning after my kids are done with school or my kids move out, whatever it is. We always push things off, and we always think that we can stop and we can say, we're gonna recalculate, and we're gonna just live the best life, the best versions of ourselves whenever we make that decision. But he was basically shown by her that no, stuff's out of control and you don't control anything. And that, I think, is some of the symbolism that that her just kind of like having this air come out of her body was there to teach Elazar ben Dudai, and that might have been one of the reasons why he actually took the message from the Zona. I'm sure he heard many Rosh Hashanah drushes and many Yom Kippur drushes, but that seemed to never affect him. But this woman, it might have just been that he'd gotten down so far and saw, wow, you know what? I'm a slave to my desires. I'm a slave to my body. It's amazing that the word that he constantly asks is for rachamim. He wants mercy. And the word that comes up over and over in this Gemara is bikshu alai rachamim. Bikshu alai rachamim. There's an amazing thing that the word for mercy in Judaism is the same shoresh, right? Rachem is the same shoresh as the Hebrew word which means womb, right? A rechem imo is the womb of his mother. And the idea is that the mercy is the type of mercy. When he's looking to the hills and he's looking to the sun and the stars and Shemayim and Aretz, he wants the mercy, that the type of mercy that a mother would have for a child, the type of mercy that is almost no limits. And how ironic then that this man, right, who has almost made it like his life's mission to sleep with every beautiful in the world, he conjures up an image like of the womb and forgiveness. He wants to ultimately go back to that moment of birth, right? Why is his tshuva such a sincere tshuva? Because, and I think you tie it with rachamim, because what does he do? He wants to go back to that moment of birth, to start over again. He wants the purity, right? And this is explaining his actions, right? I said when I presented it that he rolled up in a ball, but no, what did he do? He ultimately went in a fetal position, right? He places his head between his knees and he cries until he dies. He assumes a fetal position and cries. He symbolically is reversing the entire process, and that's what tshuva is, right? When we come out of a mikvah and we're pure, we're coming out a new bria. We're coming out ultimately from the from the womb, and that was his sincere tshuva. How did he get there? He got there because he took personal responsibility, right? In life, he looked to the natural world, and we all have a nature. We all have predispositions for certain proclivities, and we're all given, we can give into our nature, but the real value of a person, the real worth of a person is, can they overcome what they've been given and set up for? I might have a greater temper, or it might be more patient. I might be more stingy, or it might be more spendthrift. Whatever it is, that's not an excuse. He was looking at nature and saying, it's because of you. You should daven for me because it's your fault that I'm the way it is. And in the end, what did he realize? What did he realize? He realized that ein hadavar taloi ela bi. It's only about me, right? He probably told himself a million times that he's a decent guy who enjoys a good party and had a weakness for beautiful women, right? Or some other rationalization. And he was just completely unaware that he'd become totally consumed by his desire. He never noticed the extent how far he had deteriorated spiritually. And he thought of himself as basically a regular guy who, who was going to be able to mend his ways, when the time came. And suddenly this woman like burps. She has this like cynical laugh and tells him that he's the hopeless case. But he's getting mussar not from a great rabbi. You, not me, the Zona says, you're the hopeless case. And he's devastated by this. He's devastated by just the mere thought, and decides then and there to change. Right? He realizes, that he is this unbelievable, like utter degenerate, utter failure in life. And he says that now is the time to go. I want to close with one little point, and the point is, why ultimately does he need to die? Why does he die? What is that all about? And the idea is that sometimes, and this is not something that we that we preach from the pulpit, but the Ramban mentions it. Many great rabbis have mentioned this, that sometimes the only real tshuva, or to get complete tshuva, to be totally wiped away of all our sins, that death is a component of tshuva. If I wanna, I can do what I can trigger what I want to do, and I can begin the process. But sometimes when a person is so evil and so off, or such a baseless human being, a debased human being, sometimes, you know what? Perhaps because of his sin and really how far he had ultimately fallen, that the only way he could really have gotten a share in the world to come, a share in Olam Haba, was by leaving the world at this apex, at this best moment, at this one shining moment of spiritual ecstasy, of spiritual triumph. At that moment when he in this world achieved purity, he was never going to have a better moment in his life. He was never going to have a better moment in his life, and therefore that was the time to, like, almost HaKadosh Baruch Hu, almost as a chesed, right? Said, oh, you know what? I'm going to quote unquote remember you like this. So tshuva, I think, what do we take away from such a crazy is a negative word. I don't want to say it's such a bizarre, such an interesting story. Obviously, that tshuva, like we spoke about, is always possible. And though at times the effects of sin can be so deep and so profound that we feel, and maybe even that they can't be reversed, right? Death alone sometimes can bring atonement, can bring a kapara to a person. But I think the uplifting message of the story, the lesson with which, Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya leaves us, is that tshuva is always accessible and purity is always possible. You're never starting too late. Rabbi Akiva and his learning is a great example of that. And everything is available. Everything is open. Everything is fair game, even to the worst sinners. So when I speak, when I think of my own averos, when I speak to other people and their averos, the game is never over. The game is never over. You might have a bigger hill to climb, but ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, as we should have kavanah all the time. He's a rotze b'tshuva. He wants, he desires, he anticipates, he can't wait. It's almost like sometimes, you can't wait you're going on a big trip and you can't wait to get on the plane, or you're looking out the window, your friend's coming, or you're going, someone's picking you up because you're so excited. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you have that image, he's always looking, is he coming yet? Is he coming yet? And he's waiting for every single one of us to come to him in the most sincere and the most genuine way, to say, I want to build a real close relationship with you. And Elazar ben Durdaya, hopefully we're not in the same stratosphere of Elazar ben Durdaya, but hopefully that when we come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a renewed sense of, I want to make this work, we can also get that title that we are a rab, a rebbe, or a rav, or a rebbitzin, or whatever title you want, but just one that's meaningful and that highlights your rendezvous with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Have a wonderful, wonderful Yom Norayim. You should be Zoche Bedin. We should all have all of the tefillot that we ask for HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be answered l'tova. It should be answered the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants them. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should shower us with the greatest blessings in the world. Shana Tova Umetuka.